My name is Benton Stokes. I'm a former fundamentalist, post-evangelical worship leader, and songwriter. I enjoy wry Manhattans, roller coasters, and road trips, just not all at the same time.
I'm Elane O'Rourke, and I'm a teacher, an author, and a spiritual coach. I was a philosophy professor and a liberal pastor in a couple of former lives, and these days I love aha moments and not-so-dry martinis.
We have conversations about life and God with a queer perspective, over cocktails, like you. This is Cocktail Theology. Tonight, we are enjoying maybe your favorite cocktail. Is this your favorite cocktail?
It's darn close. I was thinking about how much symbolism it has for me. When I have a martini, and it's not something I have all the time.
Right.
But when I do, I feel really solidly in myself.
Oh, that's a good way to say that.
Which sounds kind of funny. I understand why it has come to mean that for me, but it still is fascinating. So thank you for martinis tonight.
Of course. Let's try it.
Our listeners may remember, it was during the Truckee sessions, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When I got onto the rant about the correct way to make martinis in Manhattans and what things were martinis and what things weren't.
Yep.
Well, friends, if you want to go back and listen to that, you can hear me say exactly how a martini must be made.
This martini is made with no-lace dry gin, which is a favorite of ours.
Yes.
To be technical about it, 4 parts dry gin. And then for the vermouth, actually divided it between Dolan Dry and Dolan Blanc. And only gets 1 part. So it's very, on the dry side, martini.
It is.
With lemon twist.
But I think you could actually, I think the Nolay is strong enough and the 2 Dolans together, I think you could go 3-1 or 2-1 on this and it would still be really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other piece is that when I'm making a martini for myself or for us, I always grate lemon peel into it, which gives it just so much more of that citrus scent.
Yeah, it's nice and bright.
Yeah.
It's very tasty.
Yay. Okay, now to drink some.
So I was reading in the news, one of the news sources that I turn to for issues of interest to progressive and queer Christians is Baptist News Global.
Which doesn't it seem like, I know some of our listeners are going, really?
Right.
What?
Yeah. They're not connected to Southern Baptist, so don't run screaming. But they have posted a couple of opinion pieces in the last few days, as we record this, about a book that is coming out this fall in September. And the book is called The Widening of God's Mercy. Now, to give you a little background, the authors of this book are Richard Hayes and his son Christopher. Richard Hayes has been esteemed as kind of the foremost New Testament scholar in conservative circles for decades.
Okay.
He was a graduate of Yale and not currently, he recently retired, but up until recently was teaching theology, New Testament specifically at Duke.
And Duke is where?
Duke is in North Carolina.
Okay. This is a white guy?
Yes, he's currently 75 years old.
Okay, got it.
So he wrote a book in the 90s, 96 to be specific, called The Moral Vision of the New Testament, Community Cross New Creation. And this is a book that conservative pastors, teachers have pointed to as the scholarly authority on why LGBTQ Christians shouldn't be included in church fellowship, church business, church activities, church, period.
Okay.
And now at this point in this new book that releases in September, he is reversing his position. And I should also add that his son Christopher is a highly esteemed professor at Fuller Seminary.
Okay.
So
Fuller I'm familiar with.
And they come from a United Methodist background. He's also an ordained Methodist pastor. So we haven't read the book, and the opinion pieces that have been written have not been written from a position of people having read the book because the book isn't yet available.
Right. So this is just based on what the publishers have said about the book, correct?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
In this book, it is said that the Hayeses are making a case for why queer Christians should be included in church.
Okay. All right.
And why they are included in God's mercy, as they put it. The title sort of insinuates that God maybe has changed God's mind. That God's like, oh, wait, I guess queer Christians aren't so bad after all. So God has, in God's mercy, has widened God's mercy to the queer folk.
Oh, well.
And of course, that's not a theological position that we take. And there have been many, many, many books and essays and pieces written on why God has always accepted people with gender differences or sexual identity differences. That's not a thing. That God would increase God's mercy at this point in history to include queer people.
Okay, I'm not poking an eye out, but I feel like I really, really may have to before this conversation's over. All right.
So I'll say the one thing, and then we'll talk about what I think is maybe the important thing. The one thing is that somebody who is esteemed as a scholar in very conservative circles is changing his mind. Okay.
Yep.
This will impact some pastors who maybe are teetering on this issue, maybe have had, some concerns or questions about why are we excluding queer people over the years, okay? And he's already getting a tongue lashing, even though no one's read the book.
Lucky him.
Yeah. So there's that, okay? And I'm sure there are lots of people who aren't allies or don't understand that would be like, shouldn't queer people be happy about this?
Right.
Right? But the fact is, many authorities on these things from the queer and liberal side of things and progressive side of things are not actually happy about this.
Right.
And I think there are good reasons.
Oh, all the things. Now, of course, I haven't read the book, so I have nothing to say about the book itself.
Right. Maybe we'll revisit this in the fall after the book
Oh, that'd
comes
be
out.
good. Yeah, because I will at least attempt to read the book. Okay. This actually makes me think of Tony Campolo.
Oh, sure.
So Tony Campolo, for those of you who don't know, was earlier he was never anti-gay people. He did believe that it was a sin, that acting on gay impulse was a sin.
Okay.
His wife, however, did not.
Ah, right.
And so for years, they had conversations about this privately and publicly. And one of the things I appreciate about Tony, who is also a reverend-y guy, who is also a teacher and a scholar, what I really appreciate about Tony is that he was listening to voices that were not his own.
Yeah.
To discover different ways of seeing the world.
Yeah.
But it does make me think of, how Campolo got really shunned by people who thought that he had just completely turned, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But it does make me think of that. And it also makes me think, this book came out in 96, you said. I was in seminary at that point. And I never heard of it. Not even once.
Yeah.
Right? So it tells you how incredibly important and how incredibly narrow that stream is.
Yes.
Right? So the people in that highly conservative, looking for ways to exclude others from their world, it's narrow but loud.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
The other piece is I'm not at all surprised he's a Methodist, and I'm not at all surprised that he's come to think somewhat differently about it, because the Methodist Church has been dealing with this since 1992, 94.
Very long time.
And the Methodist Church, for all of its flaws, aims for conversation and consensus. So that hasn't worked.
No.
And I could go on about that one for a long time. But what strikes me is, in some ways, he's been encouraged to decide how he felt about this in a really functional way.
Yeah.
Okay. So, interesting. I'm always glad when people come to the idea that God may love people. That always makes me really, really happy.
Yeah.
That's all good. But if I ever hear, and it's like I'm going to, and it just makes me so insane So I was thinking about this today when you mentioned it to me. Like, I've been thinking about it since you told me about it. It's like, I am so sick of white people's amazing grace moments that I could just scream.
Yes.
And it tends to be white men.
Yes.
And it tends to be white men who are then, shunned by their denomination or their church and then become like little celebrities.
Uh-huh.
They make me nuts.
Totally understand.
And even if they turn out to be good people, and I'm not going to name any of them, but I can see names just floating in front of my eyes.
It's like the credits on Star Wars.
It's like the credits on Star Wars. It's like, look, I'm really glad you came over to the light side of everything.
Yeah.
But you're still an a-hole.
Yeah.
And you brought that with you into this presentation of your discovery that other people are human besides you.
Right.
And it really made me think, so the song Amazing Grace was written by somebody who became aware of his own culpability in slavery.
Ah, yes.
Right?
Right.
And he's really lamenting that he had this position. Okay? He had been in the slave trade. Now, the reason I bring this up is because when he discovered this about himself, he left the slave trade. Mm-hmm. He realized that what he was doing was wrong. Mm-hmm. That is a very different thing than saying, I've changed my mind. Yeah. Look at me changing my mind. and this whole thing makes me think of, imagine that the writer of Amazing Grace, who had been a slave trader, let's make him a slave owner because it's an easier picture. Yeah. Imagine that he had come to the idea that slavery was bad and was like, oh, wow, I shouldn't have been doing this. I've now been found. I'm going to buy my slaves a new pair of shoes. That's how I feel about this kind of book.
Right.
Because it isn't like the first thing this person did was come to any queer community and say, I totally effed you over.
Right.
And I am trying to learn, and I'm an idiot, and I don't expect you to teach me, but I've got to figure this out.
Right.
And I am really sorry I did that.
Right.
I do not need your forgiveness, because, white people go to black people all the time and say, I really want forgiveness. It's like, no, please don't do that. Mm-hmm. And let me somehow find a way to repair the damage. If this guy had gone through 12-step, at some point he would have said, oh, dang, I need to make amends to those tens of thousands of children and adults whose lives I damaged.
Yeah. Yes.
As opposed to, I've got a new book written with my son. Yeah, it makes me nuts.
Yeah.
It makes me nuts. And it isn't like he's the first person to ever think through what the New Testament actually says. Yeah. I mean, the whole picture of it, y'all, I am rarely without words, but at this point, I am just completely without words. It so offends me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredibly offensive. Some of the opinion things that I have read, of course, coming from Queer Voices, have been a lot of the things you just mentioned. Is he donating the proceeds from this book to nonprofits that help queer kids? Is he pointing people to queer voices and queer writers? And is he giving his stage and his microphone and his pulpit to people who aren't anything like him that he now feels are okay? Like, is he doing any of these things? And we've not seen any of that yet that I'm aware of.
Right.
And because he's already retired, his career is not in jeopardy.
At all.
Perhaps his legacy might get dinged in some way.
Oh, darn.
But I'm sure that he's counting on, other people like us to come alongside him, put our arms around him and say, well, thank God you came over. We forgive you, we bless you, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you so much for coming to think that we're okay.
Right. So, but now that word is out about this book, I'm very interested to see if anything that remotely resembles any of that happens.
Right. It suddenly occurs to me that the widening of God's mercy, and now I want to read the book for this piece. I wonder whether the phrase, the widening of God's mercy, is about him.
Perhaps.
But that's the Amazing Grace story,
Right.
right?
Right.
Look how graceful God is for giving me insight into whatever, which is great. And again, when I acknowledge my sin, and I certainly have plenty of it, the understanding that God is constantly just saying, keep going, talk to me, let's work this out, let's keep moving, is a huge comfort. And so if the widening of God's mercy applies to him, fantastic.
Yeah.
However, there is no way to read the title of this without saying, really? Mm-hmm. Wow. Mm-hmm. Huh. Yeah. And it's like, Peter Gomes, who was a African-American, and I don't think he was an endowed chair. I think he actually had a professorship at Harvard, wrote a lot on scripture, and gay black man, did not write directly from that point of view. He did not deliberately take that lens. Here's how I read the New Testament as a gay black man. There was one book called The Good Book, where he addresses that to some degree, and he comes out in kind of a squishy place from my perspective.
Okay.
What I would like to see is somebody like this guy say, I've got a new book coming out, but before you read it, you need to go read Peter Gomes' book,
Yes.
The Good Book.
Yes.
Or you need to go read any of these other authors whom I could name and spend lots and lots of hours naming people who have already done this work. Who are not just 75-year-old white men, but are a range of diversity of the voices of people who follow God and have intelligence and write about it. I'm so pissed off over this, I can't even tell you.
Yes. No, totally. I completely agree with you. And
Who's publishing the book? I'm sorry.
Yale is, I believe. Yeah.
So tell us about Christopher. This is the son, right?
I don't know a ton, but I know that he is an Old Testament professor at Fuller, and Fuller is in Pasadena, and it's an interesting seminary. My friend Bianca, who's a progressive, graduated from Fuller.
I've taken classes at Fuller.
Yeah, but sometimes they take very conservative stands on certain issues, so it's hard to know how his university community is feeling about all of this, because I haven't seen anything that says anything about that.
Am I remembering he's an endowed chair?
Yes.
Okay.
He's an endowed chair, which means that his position is paid for by this endowment, and within that endowment there are certain expectations that he's going to abide by in this role. And by writing this book, he may push himself right out of a job.
Or may not.
May not.
I mean, who knows what the terms of the endowment are.
Right, so it just depends on what the endowment says.
Okay.
So this will be something we'll continue to watch and catch you listeners up on. But going back to what you just said, honestly, all of us can benefit from reading these queer writers and queer voices, and understanding other people's queer experience, right, with God, right, with the church, right. One other thing I would like to point out too is that there is nothing in orthodoxy anywhere that precludes queer people from being a part of Christianity, of being a part of God's kingdom. This is not orthodox, okay? It's not in the creeds.
Right.
This has been the response of the conservative church, evangelical church specifically, but this is a relatively new development in the history of the church.
Definitely.
Because, queer people have been around forever. And I dare say, there were queer people on the councils that created the creeds that decided what books were going to be in the Bible. Right. So queer people have made their mark in the church forever. Yes. They've only been excluded in recent generations.
Yeah. Yeah, and just I want to lift up that when you say orthodoxy, you're talking about the positions of the church over the years rather than the Orthodox Church.
Yes, okay. Right.
I just want to be really clear about that.
Yeah. Orthodoxy is like things that point directly to the Gospels, things that point directly to the Bible.
Creeds.
Like the creeds. Yeah. So the exclusion of LGBTQ plus people in the church that comes from a place of maintaining power. It's manipulation.
That's right.
It's striking fear. It's what the evangelicals are doing today to other groups as well as queer people.
That's right.
But it's basically, you belong to our club and you believe what we believe, and not only that, you look like we look, and you drive what we drive, and you worship how we worship, or you're not loved by God and you're doomed to hell or whatever.
Or you just need to get right with Jesus.
You need to get some Jesus.
You need to get you some Jesus. Yeah. I would love if any of our listeners have heard or have read or are thinking about people of any skin color, any ethnicity, any sexual orientation, gender orientation, anything. Mm-hmm. That are coming at this from either their personal experience or from honestly listening to other people's experience. Because I believe, I hope this is true, you can be a white person and not expect people of color to forgive you and to do your mea culpas and then go do whatever. Right. I think you can actually pay attention to what other people are saying and amplify it. Mm-hmm. But I would love to hear that. I mean, I have books that I've read. I've had teachers that I really respect. But I would love to hear what's happening more currently from our listeners.
I would love to know that too. Yeah.
That would be really, really helpful.
I would love to know that too. Yeah, you guys, throughout this season, if you come across a writer, whether it's someone that's writing on Substack or someone who's putting out books or
Instagram
or teachers, pastors, we would love to hear any of that, because I believe that we are at a very important time in our history. And when we look at the ways that evangelicals are panicked right now, and I don't like framing evangelicals as enemies, but they take starkly different views on almost everything we believe, and their views hurt people.
Yes.
So because of the fevered pitch at which they're operating, they have to know that their time is short.
Yep.
So we need to know what we're doing.
Right.
We need to know what we really believe, and we have to be willing to stand up for that.
Right.
And part of that is being acquainted with other people's experiences with God, with other people, within themselves. Definitely it pays all of us to read and to be informed and to form our own thoughts and not just believe in everything that you hear from a pulpit or, read on a quote-unquote Christian website, right?
Or a deconstructionist website.
Or a deconstructionist website, which we'll talk more about deconstruction throughout the season. But it's just, listeners, we really value your input on these conversations, because we do view this as a conversation with you. So please do reach out to us. We're at cocktailtheology.com. It's really easy to find us. Reach out, give us your thoughts, your ideas, your questions, your frustrations around these topics. And if you disagree with us, we can handle that too.
We're big people.
Yeah. But please do reach out. And this will be an ongoing conversation, because this is an ever-evolving topic and idea. I will say that when someone of Richard Hayes' stature is writing this book, you have to assume that there are other people waiting in the wings that have been wanting to write this book too. Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have written it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or whatever. But I do believe that this is all part of a turning of the tide, right? Now, how this all plays out kind of is sort of up to us.
It is absolutely up to us. It is hugely up to us.
All right, listeners, thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Funny how the view can change, how life just seems to rearrange itself, no matter what it was. I don't know how it goes, but look, moving on feels pretty good. Moving on feels pretty good.
If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like and hit subscribe wherever you're listening right now. We welcome your comments, questions, and ideas for conversations and for cocktails. Please get in touch with us at our website, cocktailtheology.com. Cocktail Theology is a production of SFS. Our theme song is Moving On Feels Pretty Good, recorded by yours truly, Benton Stokes. You can find my music wherever you stream your favorite artists. Join us next Thursday for another new episode.